She stumbled out of the heat with nothing but a torn cloth, blood drying from scraped knees and terror pushing her forward. The sun was straight overhead, the ground burned her feet, and she didn't know where she was running anymore. Every step hurt, every breath scraped, and stopping felt worse than dying. She'd left everything behind in the dark, her voice, her name, her safety, and she was sure someone was still coming. When she reached the line of fence posts and the wide open ranch beyond them, her knees finally gave out. She slid down the trunk of a cottonwood tree, shaking, clutching the cloth to her chest, trying to make herself smaller than fear. That was when the horse stopped. That was when the man stared. Caleb Hart didn't move at first because he always looked before he acted. At 49, he'd learned that rushing got men killed, and silence kept them alive. He sat tall in the saddle, dust on his boots, eyes sharp, jaw tight. Studying the scene in front of him, his jaw worked like he was chewing on a thought, the way he always did when he didn't want to feel something. A young woman in her mid-20s, bruised, barefoot, breathing like she'd run from hell itself. No wagon, no supplies, no story that ended well. His eyes stayed on her too long. That was his bad habit. He looked at people like they were a problem to solve. He could read a man across a poker table, but he never learned when to stop. Her hands trembled harder, and panic rose in her throat like bile. She'd seen that look before. The pause before a man decided what he could take. She pulled the cloth tighter, pressed her back into the bark, and forced the words out. "Don't look at me like that." The sentence cracked between them, sharp and fragile at the same time. Caleb flinched, as if she'd struck him instead. He looked down, aware of himself now, aware of how that silence must feel to someone already broken. Slowly, carefully, he swung down from the saddle, keeping both hands where she could see them. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said it low and calm, like a man talking to a spooked horse. He took off his coat, laid it on the ground several steps away, then backed off again. He turned his head, giving her privacy without making a show of it. "Use it," he said, and kept his eyes on the fence line instead of on her. Only when the coat disappeared around her shoulders did he breathe again. She didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached for the coat like it might vanish. Her eyes stayed locked on him, wide, glassy, waiting for the lie to show itself. Caleb noticed the marks then, the bruises that weren't from falling, the kind that came from a man grabbing too hard, not from a trail, the way she flinched when the wind touched her skin. He didn't ask questions, because questions could wait, and fear couldn't. "You're safe here, for now." He meant it, but he also knew how cheap those words sounded. Safety was a promise the West rarely kept. As he crouched to pour water into a tin cup, the sleeve of his shirt slid back. For half a second, sunlight caught the pale ring on his finger. Where a band used to be, he noticed it too late. She saw it. Her eyes flicked from the mark to his face, and something else broke inside her. A man who looked that long. A man who said gentle things. A man who had a wife. Caleb followed her gaze, and his jaw clenched. He pulled his hand away, rubbed the mark like it burned, and said nothing. Silence was his habit, and it had ruined things before. Out here, a man's best habit could turn into his worst flaw, and Caleb was living proof of it. Subscribe if you want more Western stories told straight, the way they really felt. And tell me this, what kind of Wild West story do you want next? Justice, revenge, or redemption? Now here's the part most folks don't expect. Caleb wasn't staring because he wanted her. He was staring because he was doing math in his head. How far she'd run, how long she'd had no water, and how close the men behind her had to be. He'd seen trouble ride in with manners and ride out with bodies, and he could already tell this wasn't a lost girl story. This was a hunted girl story, the kind that ends with a grave, unless one man makes a decision that ruins his own life. The girl finally took the cup, her fingers brushing his, then snapping back. She drank too fast, choked, wiped her mouth with the cloth, and stared at the dirt. "I can't go back." Caleb didn't ask where back was. He already knew it wasn't a place that deserved her. From the far road, a faint sound carried on the heat. The rhythm of hooves where no one should be riding this time of day. Caleb stood slowly, eyes narrowing, listening. The past he'd buried, the wife people whispered about, the trouble standing at the edge of his land. He had a choice to make, and it wouldn't leave his hands clean. If a man with a past protects a girl running from one, who pays the price in the end? Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the porch with a tin cup gone cold, listening to the dark breathe around his land. The girl slept in the hay loft, wrapped in his coat, finally still after hours of shaking. Every few minutes she'd twitch like she was falling again. And every time she did, Caleb felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. By dawn, he knew two things for sure. Someone was looking for her. And whoever it was, they weren't coming with good intentions. He found her sitting up just after sunrise, knees pulled in. She stared at the slats of light cutting through the boards. She looked worn in the morning, like the night had taken what little strength she had left. "My name's Lila May," she said, before he could ask. "I taught school for a spell. I'm not a child, even if I look like one right now." Her voice was hoarse but steady, like she'd practiced saying it out loud. "I didn't plan on ending up here." "Most folks don't," Caleb said. It wasn't a joke, but it wasn't a sermon either. She told him enough to matter, and not enough to bleed. She'd been staying with family outside Tascosa, her brother-in-law Silas Klein, a man folks tipped their hats to and trusted with cattle and money. She stopped there for a long moment, eyes fixed on the floor. "He said no one would believe me, she finally said, and I believed him." Caleb didn't push. He didn't need details to hear the truth in her voice. He'd lived long enough to know the sound of someone who'd run, because staying meant breaking. What surprised him was the rest. She hadn't just run with fear. She'd run with something Silas wanted back. From inside the folded cloth, she pulled a thin ledger page, creased and smudged, numbers written careful and tight. "I don't know what it means," she said, "but he nearly killed me trying to get it." Caleb read it once, then again. Then he went quiet in that way that made people uneasy. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't a confession. It was worse. Weights that didn't match, dates that skipped, marks that didn't belong to honest ranch work, cattle that vanished on paper and reappeared somewhere else with different brands. "You didn't steal this," Caleb said. She shook her head fast. "I found it." He hid it under the floor. "I thought if I kept it, I could make him stop." Caleb sighed through his nose. That was the trouble with truth in the wrong hands. It didn't protect you. It painted a target on your back. That was when the hooves came again. Closer this time. Caleb stepped to the fence line and waited. Two men rode up slow, eyes scanning the ranch like they already owned it. One smiled like a preacher, the other didn't smile at all. "Morning," the first said. "We're looking for a young woman. Might have passed through here." Caleb leaned his weight against the post. "Plenty of folks pass through," he said. "Most don't stay." The men exchanged a look. The quiet one glanced toward the barn. That was enough. "You seen her or not?" the smiling one said. Caleb straightened. His voice didn't rise. That made it worse. "You should ride on." The smile faded. The quiet one reached for his reins wrong. Caleb moved before the thought caught up. It wasn't a fair fight, and it wasn't meant to be. A shove into the dust, a fist to the ribs, a boot that missed by inches but sent the message clear. They backed off fast after that, cursing and promising trouble. One of them spat and said the name out loud like it carried weight. "Silas won't like this." Caleb watched them ride off, heart pounding slow and heavy. He'd crossed a line now. He knew it. Back in the barn, Lila stood frozen, clutching the ladder rail. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yeah," Caleb said. "I did." That was the moment he stopped pretending this was about charity. This was about a choice he'd made a long time ago, after watching the wrong people walk free because no one wanted the trouble. "I'm not handing you back to him," Caleb said. "But I'm not hiding you forever either." She swallowed. "Then what happens to me?" Caleb rubbed his jaw, thinking. He hated towns, hated courts, hated the way words got twisted once they left your mouth, but he hated bullies more. We take this to the law, he said. Careful, quiet. With someone who isn't in Silas Klein's pocket. Her shoulders slumped with something like relief and dread mixed together. People already think things, she said. About you. About me. Caleb looked away toward the empty horizon. He thought about the ring mark on his hand, about the wife folks whispered about how easy it was for Story to get ahead of the truth. Let them think, he said. Truth catches up eventually. As the sun climbed higher, Caleb saddled his horse with the slow certainty of a man walking into a fight he couldn't avoid. He didn't know yet that Silas had already been to town, that words had already been planted, that by the time they reached Amarillo, the story waiting for them would paint him as the villain. And if the law believed Silas first, would anyone listen to a rancher with a past and a girl with nothing left to lose? Caleb chose Amarillo first because it sat between nowhere and everywhere. Not too small to be blind, not big enough to be owned by one man. They rode at a steady pace through the heat. Not fast enough to draw notice, not slow enough to invite it. Lila kept her head down, riding close behind him, his old coat pulled tight around her shoulders. She did not speak much, and neither did he. Some roads were better traveled without talk. By mid-morning, the town came into view. Low buildings crouched under the sun, dust hanging like a second sky. Silas didn't have to ride fast. He just had to send a man ahead with a story. Caleb felt the shift the moment they crossed the first hitching post. Eyes lifted, men paused. Stories were already here, waiting. They went to the edge of town first, where a small postal office leaned against a feed store. Caleb knew the man there by sight, not by name. That was usually enough. The deputy listened with his arms crossed, face set in that careful way men wore when they did not want trouble to stick. Lila spoke soft, hands folded, saying only what she had to say. Caleb stood silent beside her, jaw tight, eyes watching every twitch of the man across the desk. The deputy nodded slow, asked a few questions, then asked a few more that cut sideways. He wasn't just asking, he was testing. Caleb could see it in the man's eyes, the way a ranch dog circles a stranger before it decides. The deputy asked the same thing 3 different ways, and every time he did, Lila's fingers tightened in her lap. Caleb wanted to step in, to say the words that would set it straight, but his mouth stayed shut, and he hated himself for it, because he knew exactly what the deputy was thinking. A scared woman and a quiet, older man. That story never ends gentle. Where had she come from? Why was she with him? Why had she run? Caleb answered when it mattered. He did not answer when it did not. Holding his tongue had always been his way of keeping control. He'd rather swallow words than risk saying the wrong one. But in town, swallowed words sounded like guilt. It worked in poker. It worked on the range. It did not work here. By the time they stepped back into the street, Caleb knew they had not been believed. Not fully, not enough. They had taken her name. They had taken his, and they had taken a look at his hand when he reached for the door. The pale ring mark did not lie. Lila saw it too. She did not say anything, but her shoulders stiffened. The space between them grew careful again. They had not gone 3 blocks when they saw the men watching from the shade of the livery. One of them smiled. Caleb recognized the look, the kind that said the story had already been told. They turned down a side street, but it did not matter. By noon, word had reached the center of town. Tascosa was only a day away, but its influence reached farther than that. Silas Klein had friends, more than Caleb expected. The sheriff arrived in the afternoon, riding in like he belonged everywhere he stopped. He greeted Caleb like an old acquaintance and Lila like a problem. The talk was polite. Too polite. The sheriff said Silas was worried sick, said family matters should be handled by family. Said a young woman in distress sometimes said things she later regretted. Caleb felt the old anger stir, the one he kept buried deep. He answered carefully. He watched the sheriff the way he watched weather. But watching was not enough. The sheriff looked at his hand, then at Lila, then back at him. He said the words slow, like they carried weight. You are a married man, Mr. Hart. Caleb felt his jaw clamp, and he made the same mistake again. He went still instead of speaking. Stillness had kept him alive on the range, but here it made him look like a liar. The street felt quieter all at once. Caleb did not deny it. Denial would have sounded worse. He only said the truth was longer than that sentence. The sheriff nodded like a man who had already made up his mind. He said until things were sorted, the young woman would be better off with her kin. Two men stepped forward, the same ones from the livery. Lila took a step back. Her hand brushed Caleb's sleeve. Just once, Caleb wanted to stop it. Wanted to lay a hand on the sheriff's shoulder and explain how wrong he was, but words were slippery here, and fists would only seal her fate. They took her then. Not rough, not gentle, just firm enough to say the law was on their side. Caleb stood in the street and watched them walk her away. It was the hardest thing he had done in years. That night, Amarillo felt smaller than any stretch of open land he had ever crossed. Caleb sat alone outside the boarding house, listening to laughter drift from somewhere he did not belong. He thought about the ledger page folded in his pocket, about the names and marks that did not line up, about the way Silas had sent men instead of coming himself. That was when he made the second choice. He rode north before dawn, past the town, past the places where gossip lived, toward Fort Elliott, where men wore badges that did not bend for local names. The marshal listened longer than the deputy had. Not because he was kinder, because the ledger made sense to him. Stolen cattle crossed jurisdictions, so did men who thought they were untouchable. The marshal did not promise anything. He only said if Silas Klein was dirty, he would find it. Caleb left Fort Elliott with no comfort, but with a direction. Behind him, Lila was already being moved again, farther from town, farther from help. And Silas was smiling, because he thought the worst was over. But the law had finally taken notice, and when it came looking, it would not come quiet. The question was simple and cruel. Would it come in time? Caleb rode hard from Fort Elliott, not reckless, just determined in the quiet way men get when they know they're late, but still moving. The marshal had not promised him justice. He had promised him attention. And out here, attention from the right man mattered more than words. The trail south ran dry and pale, the kind that showed every mistake a horse could make. Caleb read it without thinking. He could tell where a rider had slowed, where one had looked back, where another had been dragged forward by fear instead of plan. They were moving Lila, not hiding her, moving her. That told him more than anything else. Men who believed they were safe did not rush. Men who believed the law was still sleeping did not change routes. Silas was nervous now, and nervous men made errors. By late afternoon, Caleb found the first sign, a scrap of cloth caught on a mesquite thorn pale against the red dirt. Not hers, but close enough to know he was on the right line. He did not call out, did not hurry. He followed the trail the way he had followed cattle for decades, patient, exact, letting the land talk. As the sun dipped lower, the wind shifted, carrying sound. Voices. A horse snorting. Metal touching metal. Caleb slowed, slid off the saddle, and led his horse the last stretch. Ahead, near a shallow bend in the Canadian River. 3 men waited, one paced, one leaned against a tree, one sat his horse too still. Lila was not tied. That was the cruel part. She did not need rope. Fear was doing the work. Silas Klein stepped into view. Clean shirt, calm face, the same one he wore in town. He spoke to her like he was doing her a favor. Caleb watched from the brush and felt his jaw lock. This was the man people trusted. This was the man who smiled while deciding what someone else would lose. Caleb could have shot him then. The thought crossed his mind, clear and simple. One pull. End of it. But he heard the marshal's voice again. If you act first, the truth never gets heard. So Caleb waited. The waiting cost him. Silas struck one of the men for a mistake, a sharp backhand, quick and mean. Lila flinched hard enough to stumble. That was enough. Caleb stepped out into the open, hands low, voice steady. Let her go. The men spun. Silas smiled like he had been expecting this moment all day. You really should mind your own land, Hart, Silas said. People are talking. Caleb said nothing, and the old silence settled in again, the habit he could not break. One of the men reached wrong. Caleb moved right. It was not pretty, and it was not brave. It was fast and close and ugly in the way fights usually are when men are tired and scared. A shove into the riverbank, a fist that landed solid. A gun kicked away before it could clear leather. Silas backed up, face tight now, a mask slipping. "You think this helps her?" he said. "You think anyone will listen to you?" Caleb stood between him and Lila without looking back. That was the choice, clear as daylight. Then the sound of hooves came again. More than one. Silas froze, just for a second, long enough for Caleb to see it. The marshal rode in with 2 deputies, dust rolling behind them like a curtain being pulled back. No shouting, no rush, just authority arriving late but heavy. Silas laughed once, short and sharp. "You boys are a long way from your business," he said. The marshal looked at him like he was counting cattle. "Stolen ones are always our business." That was when Silas's eyes flicked to Caleb's hand. To the ring mark, to the rumor he thought would still protect him. But rumors did not matter here. Paper did, numbers did, and so did witnesses. They took Silas then, not gently, not roughly, just the way men were taken when the game was finally up. Lila stood shaking, staring at the river like she could still disappear into it if she needed to. Caleb said her name once. Soft. She looked at him and nodded, just once. The ride back was quiet. No relief yet, only space to feel the weight of what had almost gone wrong. At Fort Elliott, the marshal did not thank Caleb. He did not need to. He said the case would move now. Slow. Thorough. That was the law's way. As Lila was led inside to give her statement, she stopped and turned back. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. Caleb shrugged, the movement stiff. "Somebody should have." The marshal watched him for a long moment after she was gone. "People say you've got a wife," he said. Caleb did not answer right away. Then he nodded once. "That complicates things," the marshal said. "Everything does," Caleb replied. He knew his flaws better than anyone. The staring, the silence, the pride. A man could outrun trouble for years, until his own habits caught him. Night fell over the fort, cooler than the land beyond it. Caleb sat alone, thinking about the years he had let settle without asking questions, about the woman everyone said he belonged to, about the girl who now needed more than protection. He had stood in front of violence. He had stood in front of the law. But the hardest thing was still ahead, because when the truth finally came out, it would not only ruin Silas, it would dig up a past Caleb had never laid to rest. The days that followed moved slower than Caleb expected and heavier than he liked. That was the way the law worked when it decided to work at all. Slow steps, careful questions, men writing things down instead of raising their voices. Lila stayed near the fort, sleeping in a small room that smelled of soap and dust. She answered questions when she could and stared out the window when she could not. Caleb waited outside more than once, hat in his hands, feeling older than he had in years. The marshal kept his word. He did not rush. He followed the paper. Paper sounds boring. Until you realize paper's how men steal without firing a shot. A false brand on a calf is one thing. A false number on a page can steal a whole ranch. Caleb watched the marshal lay the sheets out and tap the same names again and again. And every time the marshal's finger landed, Caleb felt the net tightening. Silas wasn't just cruel, he was careful. And careful men don't get caught unless somebody makes them angry enough to slip. The ledger page Lila had carried was not the whole story. It was a loose thread. But loose threads led to knots, and knots led to men who pulled too hard. Within a week, names started to repeat. Dates overlapped. Brands showed up in the wrong places. Silas Klein stopped smiling. They brought him in for questioning twice. The first time he laughed it off. The second time he asked for a lawyer. That told Caleb everything he needed to know. But the law was not finished, and neither was Silas. Men like him did not go down quietly, and they did not go down alone. One night, a fire broke out at a holding pen near the river. Another night, a witness failed to show. Then a man who had talked too much packed up and left town before sunrise. The marshal started sleeping with his boots on. So did Caleb. Lila noticed. She noticed everything now. Fear had sharpened her. "I don't want this to follow you," she said one evening as they sat on a bench outside the fort. The evening had cooled, and the air felt clear for once. Caleb looked out toward the dark. "It already has," he said. She studied him the way he used to study other people. Quiet, careful. "They keep saying you have a wife," she said. Caleb did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat. "I did," he said. "I think I still do." That was when the past stopped being a rumor and started being a problem. Her name was Evelyn. They had married young and stubborn, back when promises felt like armor. Then sickness came through and work dried up, and she left with a wagon heading east, chasing help and hope. The letter saying she was gone never came. Neither did the one saying she was alive. So people filled in the space, Caleb said. And I let them. The marshal listened to that story with the same patience he gave numbers and brands. Then he leaned back and said something Caleb had not expected. "We may need her," he said. Caleb felt his stomach drop. Silas had been careful. Too careful. But there were gaps only someone close would know. Routes he had used early on. Names he trusted when he should not have. If Evelyn was alive, she might be the missing piece. They found her 2 days later, not far. Working in a boarding house near a rail spur, the marshal had asked around the rail line because people who disappear often turn up where trains keep moving. Older, thinner, still standing. When Caleb saw her, he did not feel relief. He felt weight. Evelyn's eyes weren't soft. "You never came looking," she said. Caleb held his tongue, 'cause she wasn't wrong. She looked at him like she had been waiting for this moment longer than he had. "I heard you were still out here," she said. He nodded. "I heard you had trouble," she said. He nodded again. They talked slow, no shouting, no tears, just facts that had been left too long in the dark. She didn't do it for Caleb. She did it because she was tired of men like Silas walking around clean while others paid the cost. Then she told the marshal what she knew, names, dates. A night she had seen Silas meet men by the river, trading papers and coin like it was nothing. It was enough. When she was done, she didn't stay for coffee or comfort. She walked back to her life, and Caleb didn't try to follow. The case turned after that, quietly, decisively. Silas was brought in again, this time without smiles or speeches. The marshal laid out the evidence piece by piece, like setting down tools on a table. That night, Silas tried one last move, not in the courtroom, but in the dark. A man Caleb didn't recognize waited by the wagon route, acting like he belonged there. Caleb spotted him the way he always spotted trouble, a little too still, a little too ready. The man stepped out, hand drifting toward his coat, and Caleb stepped in first. It wasn't a shootout. It was a hard, close shove into the dirt and a wrist twisted until the truth fell out. Silas had paid him to scare Lila quiet and to make Caleb look like the problem. The marshal heard that, and the last bit of protection Silas thought he had disappeared. Silas watched it happen with eyes that kept looking for a door that was no longer there. When they took him away for good, even the men who used to tip their hats to him wouldn't meet his eyes. The town just exhaled. That was how it usually went. Lila stood beside Caleb as they watched the wagon roll out. She did not speak. She did not have to. Later that night, she found him sitting alone, the ring mark on his hand pale in the lantern light. "It's finished," she said. "It's not," he said. She frowned. He looked at her then, not the way he had that first day. Not measuring, not judging, just seeing. "I still have to decide who I am when all this is over," he said. She sat down beside him, close but not touching. So do I, she said. They did not make promises. They did not need to. What they had both learned was that truth did not fix everything. It only cleared the ground. What came next would take time, patience, and a kind of courage that did not look like fighting at all. The law had done its part. Now the rest was up to them. But one question still hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. When the dust finally settled, would the past let either of them walk forward, or would it demand one last price before the story could end? The stillness that followed did not feel empty. It felt earned. Silas was gone down the road under guard, his name already shrinking behind him. The ledger was locked away. The talking stopped, and the land around Fort Elliott went back to breathing the way it always had. Caleb stayed a few days longer than he planned. He fixed a broken rail, helped a hand shoe a horse, sat on a bench in the evening, and watched the light change. Lila stayed too, not because she was told to, because for the first time in a long while, no one was telling her where she had to be. They did not rush anything. Men Caleb's age learned long ago that rushing only created new problems, and Lila had learned that healing did not care about anyone else's schedule. Some mornings they spoke, some mornings they worked side by side without saying a word. Both felt right. One afternoon she asked him about the ranch, not the fences or the cattle, but the quiet parts, why he stayed so far out, why he did not move on when others did. Caleb thought about it longer than the question needed. I got used to the silence, he said, and then I hid in it. She nodded like she understood more than he had said. When Evelyn left, Caleb did not chase. He told himself it was pride. Later he realized it had been fear. Fear of hearing a truth he was not ready for. Letting the years pass had been easier than facing the space they left behind. That was the thing about the past. It did not go away just because you stopped looking at it. When the paperwork was finished, the marshal brought Caleb one last set of documents. Nothing dramatic, just closure. Caleb signed where he was told, set the pen down. And for the first time in a long time, his hand felt light. Lila watched without a word. It is done, she said. He nodded. It is. They rode back to the ranch together a few days later. Not like a parade, just two people returning to a place that had not judged them yet. Summer had softened the land. Grass pushed through dry patches. The creek ran steady again. Life did not reset. It continued. At the ranch, Lila took her time finding her place. She helped with books, learned the rhythms, asked questions that mattered. Caleb noticed something else too. He noticed he was not watching her the way he watched strangers, not measuring, not guarding. He was learning to see without suspicion. One evening as the sun dropped low, she stood by the fence and said something that stayed with him. I used to think being strong meant not needing anyone, she said. Now I think it means choosing who you trust. Caleb smiled at that, just a little. A year passed, then another. Talk reached them now and then. People always talked. Some said Caleb had done right. Some said he had invited trouble. He let them talk. What mattered was quieter than that. One morning he found Lila in the kitchen, hair pulled back, reading by the window. The sight stopped him cold, not because it was grand, because it was ordinary. That was when he understood what had changed. He was not fixing the past anymore. He was building something new. They spoke about it plainly when the time came. No speeches, no promises too big for daylight. She chose to stay, long after the fear stopped running her life. And when she said yes to him, it was her choice, plain and steady. When they finally married, it was after 2 full summers had come and gone. There were still nights Caleb woke and sat on the porch, chewing nothing, jaw working like the old days. He'd stare out at the fence line the way he used to stare at people, trying to solve something that couldn't be solved. And sometimes Lila would step out with a blanket and say nothing at all. She'd just sit beside him, close enough to remind him he wasn't alone. That was their real marriage right there. Not the vows, not the witnesses, just 2 imperfect people choosing the same direction, again and again. Even when it was hard, no one rushed her into it, no one talked her into it either. A handful of witnesses, a borrowed table. A breeze that did not ask permission. No one pretended it made everything perfect. It did not. Caleb still went quiet when troubled. Sometimes he'd catch himself staring off, jaw working, holding back words that should have been said. And Lila would see it, not with fear this time, but with understanding. 'Cause out here, nobody was built perfect. They were built, then tested. Lila still woke some nights before dawn, but they knew those things about each other. And knowing mattered more than pretending. There's a lesson in that. If you're listening, no one comes through life untouched. We all carry habits that protect us once and hurt us later. We all make choices that feel right at the time and heavy years afterward. What matters is not perfection. What matters is what you do when you finally see clearly. Do you turn away, or do you step forward anyway? Most men don't get in trouble because they're evil. They get in trouble because they keep doing the same small wrong thing until it turns big. If this story hit you somewhere real, tap like before you go. And subscribe, because out here, the next tale is always waiting just beyond the fence line. Let me ask you something before we ride on. Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken? And if you could go back, would you still choose the easy quiet or the hard right thing? Caleb did, not because he was flawless, but because when the moment came, he chose to be better than he had been. And sometimes that is enough. Out here, a man doesn't get many chances to set things right. When one shows up, you take it, or you carry that regret like a stone for the rest of your life.